Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. I'm really excited to re-release this wonderful conversation I had with the author Gregory Maguire. You all probably know him for writing the blockbuster novel, now musical, celebrating its 20th year on Broadway, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. So first, I want to play a little trivia game with you all, since you all know that I love trivia. And shout out to Burrito in Port Jeff Village. Thanks for hosting our reality TV trivia night. I'm going to be doing one more trivia event before their summer season kicks off, which their summer season kicks off during Cinco de Mayo, even though, it's not yet summer, but it's officially summer in May for them. So at the end of April, we're going to be doing a pop culture trivia event. There will be questions about celebrities, TV shows, movies, books. Many of them are going to come from episodes on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So you should listen to the podcast episodes to get a head start. And the trivia question I have for you all, and the winner of this question will receive a free copy of Wicked by Gregory Maguire. Your choice if you want the audiobook or a physical book sent to you or a digital ebook sent to you. I'll do any of them from my Amazon account. Here's your question. There is a major difference between the Wicked ending of the novel and the Wicked musical ending. What is one of the major differences in the ending between the novel and the musical? The first person who DMs me at Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Instagram wins a free copy of Wicked. Okay, there's your incentive there. I'm so excited because when I had Gregory Maguire on, I had taken my students to see Wicked. This was March of 2020. No, sorry, March of 2022. Um, and I was going to say 2020 was the pandemic. Okay. No, not during lockdown. I didn't take them to see Wicked in an underground performance. Um, so March of 2022, I took my students to see Wicked. I interviewed Gregory Maguire, and then my students actually submitted questions that you'll hear at the end of this episode. And it was really wonderful that my students got a chance to ask him questions. And then they listened back to his interview, and it was just such an insightful process. So I loved listening back to my conversation with him in preparation for releasing this to all of you. On March um, 9th, I'm taking a group of about 15 people to see Wicked for their matinee performance. So I can't wait to recap that for you all. I will definitely release a recap video on Instagram and TikTok. You know me and my social media. I'll definitely be sharing my experience, taking photos of the group, hopefully meeting some of the cast at the stage door. And then on April 7th at 4 p.m., I have the Wicked Book Club. So it's a virtual book club. We just discussed Leah Remini's Troublemaker. We're discussing Wicked by Gregory Maguire. The person who wins that trivia question also, you get to come to the book club for free too. So it's on Zoom. It's at 4 p.m. Um, April 7th, 4 p.m. Can't wait to see you all. There's going to be a nice group of book club attendees because a lot from the musical event are going to be coming to the book club. So you can go to ivorytowerboilerroom.com, or if you're on Instagram, click the link in my Ivory Tower Boiler Room bio, and you'll see how to RSVP. Okay, without further ado, here is Gregory Maguire. I am joined by the one and the only Mr. Gregory Maguire, the great and powerful. Hello, Gregory. This is such a treat.
Hi, Andrew. It's really, really nice to meet you through this strange and quixotic mechanism we call Zoom, and to see evidence of the landscape of my mind decorating the landscape of your room there.
Yes. Well, I should begin with my first time experiencing your novel. I have the original copy, is when your novel Wicked, right? The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, almost 30 years old, but 1995, right, is when it came out.
Exactly. Yep.
That I was about to see the musical. So my mother took me to the local Barnes and Noble in South Jersey, and there was the whole display of the cast album and then the musical tie-in edition. I was in
Uh-huh.
fifth grade and I devoured your book, and my students can't believe that I read your novel in fifth
Oh,
grade.
yes, I'm a little shocked myself. If your mother had written to me and said, "Is this appropriate for a fifth grade boy?" I would have said, "Absolutely not." Preserve his innocence.
Well, I
But
learned a lot, but and we'll get into all the different layers. I mean, teaching it now and looking back, there's so much psychological layers that I,
right.
was not latching onto. But first, I didn't know you have a PhD in literature. Is that correct?
That's right. I got my PhD in 1990, a couple of years before I began writing Wicked. I did not take the PhD in order to become a better writer.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, while it certainly has some benefits, that isn't necessarily the way that one would choose to go. I took the PhD, I enrolled in it because at the time I had a tenure track position teaching in a college, and it was required in order for me to be eligible for tenure,
Hmm.
which at the time I thought I wanted. I then didn't want it. I left the college, but I had already done half the degree anyway, so I kept on with it.
Yeah. Were you teaching mostly fantasy or?
I was teaching a great deal of fantasy. I was an assistant professor at the Center for the Study of Children's Literature at Simmons College, which is where I had incidentally gotten my own master's degree. I got my master's degree, I graduated, and I was hired, half a year later to be on the faculty, uh, and also to be on the kind of office side of things as well, institutional management side.
Hmm.
So um, and I liked doing that, and I was very riven with curiosity about children's books my whole life from childhood on. But it all came together when, in the early '90s, I decided my intellectual ambitions and my love of the way that children's stories deal with the complex world could get married and could provide the fertile breeding ground for something like Wicked.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. So when does I want to say your first rendezvous with the Wicked Witch of the West begin? I mean, do you remember your first time seeing The Wizard of Oz or when it entered?
I don't remember precisely the first time, but I do remember the circumstances, which will be familiar to anybody uh, who might be watching this, who is in my generational bandwidth, as it were. Um, my parents, I should say, were very strict people, and they did not admire the blandishments of television, such as was coming over the airwaves in the late 50s and early 60s when I was a kid and stumbling into the living room to see what people were doing. They therefore limited our TV access strictly. But one of the ways in which they occasionally relented was to let the family watch the Wizard of Oz when it was annually rebroadcast every year. It's hard for contemporary young people really to put themselves back into the mindset of what it is not to have instant access to everything all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
the annual airing of The Wizard of Oz wasn't available in video because there were no videos. Nobody had a VCR. Nobody had streaming. Nobody had phones or computers. All we had was that piece of furniture with the wooden sides and the glass front that was called a TV in the middle of everybody's living room in America. And so we were enthralled and beholden to the scheduling of the three main networks. One of them, I think it was CBS, but I'm not really sure, would air The Wizard of Oz every year, and my parents let us watch it. So your question, Andrew, was, do you remember the first experience of it? I don't remember the first experience of it, which means I probably was allowed to watch it young and maybe younger than I was really ready for it.
Hmm.
But I do remember the experience of knowing it was part of the calendar of thrills that were provided in childhood. we had Easter, we had Halloween, we had the 4th of July, we had the Wizard of Oz. It was almost liturgical, and one could look forward to it, anticipate it, look back upon it, and know that it would come again next year, just just like one's birthday or like Christmas Eve.
Yeah. And was it soon after this? It kind of reminds me how The Sound of Music now appears every year. And I think The Wizard of Oz still is played during Easter time, if I
It wouldn't
remember.
surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was. Every now and then I get emails from excited friends who say, "Oh, The Wizard of Oz is on tomorrow." And it's like, well,
Oh,
actually doesn't do anything for me anymore
oh, that's so sweet, though.
in the way that it did when I was a kid. But I still like the fact that young people are having exposure to it. It probably looks kind of shabby compared to CGI
Mm,
effects that the newer generation, the younger generations, plural,
mm,
are used to. And even I admit, as a kid, I knew that Bert Lahr was a man in lion pajamas. I knew he wasn't a real lion. I knew the scarecrow wasn't a real scarecrow. It was a man dressed up like a scarecrow. Uh, but the witch seemed like a real witch to me. It's funny, there's a distinction between the cardboard and costuming of a certain kind of vaudeville approach to entertainment
mm,
and the deep and malign, what I thought of was kind of reality of the personification of evil in the
mm,
witch.
mm.
She seemed in some ways the most genuine of all the people in Oz, um, more genuine than the wizard or Glinda or the people in costumes. She was the real deal, and she anchored the film for me, both dramatically and I suppose, looking back on it, morally.
Yeah, I will always remember. Um, I grew up right near a town called Pittman that has this vaudeville theater from the
Uh-huh.
1930s and started by playing movies. And when I was young, they were doing The Wizard of Oz, and it was when one of the surviving Munchkin actors came and
Uh-huh.
spoke after. And I will always remember how kind they loved Margaret Hamilton. Like
Yeah.
Margaret Hamilton was apparently one of the nicest. And I will always remember when she surprises Judy Garland. This is on YouTube. And
Uh-huh.
Judy says, "Can you do the cackle?" And like Margaret Hamilton does it for her.
Uh,
And
I
yeah,
have
I
to look
think,
that up.
yeah, no, you should. Yeah, I heard Judy Garland and Margaret Hamilton were like the life force
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
set. But well, and I don't know a lot about the Glinda actress. I think her
Yeah.
name Billy Burke.
Lily Burke was her
Yeah,
name.
I heard she had a certain tone. that's I'm not gonna gossip, but
Well, no, even a kid could see that she was supposed to be a beautiful princess, and that was fine. Her gown and her garb and her fluting voice and her kind manner were all persuasive. But she'd been around the block a couple of times. She didn't, she looked more like a queen than a princess. I mean, a princess implies somebody who's young, and even a 6-year-old could see, she wasn't exactly young. She was something else.
yeah, and there's a certain manipulation. Like you
Oh
can
yeah.
tell the way she plays Glinda. Um there's a fear. Like, why is she plotting these things with Dorothy and leading her to this path?
Yes. Yes. I mean, very often the question arises where, when did the story of Wicked as its own story get seeded,
Hmm.
in my mind? And it had to have been early on, because there were two things about the movie that arrested me as a child. And I don't mean the first or second or third viewings, but by the time I was in third or fourth grade and seeing it for the sixth or seventh time, I began to be more aware of my own reactions. Like, we would talk, what scenes are you looking forward to? What scenes do you hate? What scenes are boring? We had nothing else to talk about, so we talked about that. And I found myself really aware that the wizard was a creep. He was,
Hmm.
and he didn't. I mean, Dorothy does lash out at him a little bit and call him a bad man in one line. And he says, he deflects that and says, I'm not a bad man, I'm just a bad wizard. And she says, oh, okay. And it's like there's no consequences to his having put all four of them in mortal danger for his own needs.
Mm.
It's like, I grew up in the shadow of Vietnam, and all through my childhood, I thought I might be drafted and sent to war. And to me, that's what he did with them. He drafted them and he sent them out to vanquish his enemy, and he wouldn't come out of the castle or even show his face because he was so timid and um, so manipulative. And I never found him cozy or endearing. And while I didn't take against him and want to throw, rotten fruit at the TV, I always thought Dorothy was better off without him, and she was good to get out of there. And to a lesser extent, when Glinda says at the end, you've had the power all along in those shoes, that to a lesser extent, I thought, well, why? Really? And you also allowed this child to get into mortal danger, for what? What do you get out of this? And the whole thing, I think I was very sensitive to issues of right and wrong, and issues of victimization, and issues of castigation, even without having any words for it. So one of the things that I loved Dorothy, of course, and I cared about what happened to her. I liked her three friends pretty well. But also, I look back at it and I think the one thing you have to admit about the witch, however scary she was, and I used to have nightmares about her, she never said anything she didn't mean, unlike all the other adults in the story. And so on a certain deep tissue kind of way, at least I admired her genuineness. That's really where the story began. I wouldn't have been able to put it that way until I was in my late teens, but I think subconsciously that was part of where the story began for me.
Yeah. Did you find a lot of layers of the witch in L. Frank Baum's
You
series?
know, I did not, but that was a great boon to me, because if he had gone into her psychology or into her backstory very much, I would have felt compelled to honor the rubrics and to work within the foundational outline that he had set. But he was not interested really in creating a deep tissue history of Oz, or a deep tissue consistency in even the makeup of Oz. He too was more pasteboard and vaudeville.
Mm.
He was closer to Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll in the inconsequence of what happens and who people are than he was in amusing the child reader on this page and the next page and the next page. That was sad to me, because once I found the Narnia books, I wanted to go back and I wanted Oz to be as deep and consistent and intentional as Narnia, and later on as Middle Earth, although I was never the big Middle Earth fan that so many people are. But that was not what Baum was providing. So my appetite for that kind of consistency and coherence actually was another motivating factor to my writing Wicked, because I wanted to take what was on the table and make a design out of it that would make sense and wouldn't contradict very much. I changed some things, but in the end, I wanted readers to come away thinking this is a more coherent place. With all its complications and all its contradictions, it's more coherent now than it was in 1939 or even in 1900.
Yeah. Well, something that shines through, especially in all of your work, but holding up Wicked, is the political allegories and how you respond to social unrest. And I mean, we're recording this right now. There's a lot of social unrest, and yes,
Yeah.
really sending our hearts out
Yeah.
with what's happening in the Ukraine. And I think, though, like you've mentioned the Vietnam War, but the Wizard of Oz was always an L. Frank Baum too. We have, the World Wars, we have the Great Depression with the
Right.
film. And even right before you probably start writing Wicked, and maybe you were already writing it in the 80s, but there was that film. Do you remember Return to Oz?
Oh, I do remember it. And I admired it more than a lot of people did.
Oh,
I
I
didn't,
love it.
I didn't love it,
Oh,
but I admired it. And I thought that the woman, the young kid they got to play Dorothy was really fine.
oh yeah.
Firuza Balk or something like that. Uh, and I liked lots and lots of it. I've only seen it once, but I found it was really strong and intense and laced with a kind of not nostalgia, but a kind of bourbon urgency.
Yeah, it's really
Uh,
gritty. Like her characterization, that's what I
yeah,
like is, I mean, it starts in a mental institution, which is
yeah,
very intense. And
very
like
intense.
the
You make me want to see it again.
decapitation of the queen, right? Like she has the heads of women.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real, but again, what I like though is it does have that gothic, the dark undertones of psychology that,
Yes.
like, well, I think Emerald City is under siege and the Yellow Brick Road has been like some bomb has gone off or something has
Right.
happened where everything is,
Sabotage.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's sabotaged, it's war torn. And it kind of reminds me, of all of the different conflicts. And I mean, you actually have a part in Wicked um, called Uprisings,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
So, let's get right into Wicked. I mean, I will say to
Uh-huh.
everyone,
Yeah.
there will be spoilers, but I think that, so I know that it's published in 1995, but when do
Right.
you actually start drafting Wicked?
Well, that's a good question. And I know the exact answer, I made the decision to start it on June 9th, 1992, I think it was. And the reason I remember that, it could be 93. I'm bad with math about when you count the number of years. You always forget whether you're supposed to add one or detract one. But I had been writing for 16 years already, been publishing for 16 years, and I had not had any great notice or success. I hadn't had any bombs, as it were, but nothing had also caught, and I was having a hard time considering how I was going to have a career going forward. And I'd written children's books up to then, chapter books, like
Mhm.
the length of A Wrinkle in Time or one of the slimmer Harry Potters, let's say. And the fact of my biography is that when I was born, my mother died. She died in childbirth. And she died at the age of 38. So I spent a good deal of the first half of my life feeling responsible for the death, which was, of course, just a consequence of life. But nonetheless, it was a weight that I carried upon my shoulders on some level. But also, as many people do, I felt how can I put this? It felt very strange to think that the day would come when I would be older than my mother had ever been. One doesn't expect that one is ever going to get older than one's parent. That's not actually supposed to happen. Of course, it does happen if you live long enough, but when you're in your 30s, I just kept thinking I was going to die when I was 38 because I just couldn't picture being older than my mother. How does that happen? So June 9th, 1992, I think, was the day, maybe it was 93, was the day I turned 39. And on the day I turned 39, I said to myself, and I knew I was going to say this, but I said to myself, okay, Gregory, you are now older than your mother ever was. If you've ever wondered whether you have enough going on upstairs to be considered a grown-up, it's got to be today because you're older than your mother. She was a grown-up when she gave birth to you, and you're now older than she was. So you can't anymore feel like you don't know enough about the world. You're older than she was. You are a grown-up. You can take on a grown-up job. And I'd been thinking about Wicked from time to time as a possibility of something to write that was for older readers. But I didn't really have the courage or strength to begin it until I turned 39. And that's when I began. But whether it was 92 or 93, I think maybe it was 92. And that sounds about right. I had written a couple of things beforehand. I had actually written about 6 pages by hand, maybe in 1989, but put it aside thinking you're not there yet. You don't have a grasp on this. Wait till you're ready. And when I turned 39, I got ready. And then I wrote it in about 5 months, not 5 contiguous months, but over the course of the next 10 months, I spent 5 months writing and 5 months thinking. And by the end of the 10-month period, I had finished it.
Wow. Well, first, that's extremely heartwarming. And, I'm like tearing up because that's so powerful. And especially like what happens with Alphaba's mother. I mean, in your novel, she doesn't die from giving birth to Alphaba, but in the musical, she dies. So I'm curious, did the creative team know about that? Like your connection to your mom?
I don't know. I think probably not. I think they just took what was in the book. And also, of course, they needed to emphasize the witch's need for her father in order to make the drama of the play be more coherent, more taut, let's say. And so getting the mother and the putative father off stage fairly early was necessary so that Alphaba's reaction to the wizard, her confused relationship with the wizard, could become front and center and could supplant any other relationship she might have with her mother or her father. So it made dramatic sense, but it also made kind of psychological sense to me too. She was adrift. That was part of her problem. She had been alone her whole life.
Yeah, but I do think, you're going to hear me gush a lot, but it's true. I think every part of Wicked gives such depth to the human condition. Like part 1 with the Munchkinlanders, I really think that you learn so much about social hierarchy and, Freck's, Alphaba's father, just to the listeners and viewers. I mean, I know your characters inside and out.
Right. No, fair enough.
But that he does have some Munchkinlander blood, so there's kind of, hiding that about himself. But his wife comes from more of this blue blood background, so like it's a very interesting clash that goes on in their relationship. And I feel like that's a constant theme, is covering up like one's own feeling inadequate about one's own birth and circumstances.
Yes, I would like to meet the person who didn't go through childhood and adolescence without feeling that they weren't letting somebody down, probably most especially themselves. It's just it's part of growing up. It's part of the human condition, I'm afraid. One thing, Andrew, that is really curious to me is, and I hope will be to those who are listening or watching, is that when you take a big project like this, the writer has some sense of obligation, some sense of ownership to what is coming up within the creative mind. And one of the ways you have to do that sometimes is to look and see what you've done and stand aside and respond to it rather than to what your initiating theories and theses might be about what you wanted to do. My instance of that is to say that when I first started Wicked, I really thought I was going to be writing a book about the character who turned out to be a Margaret Hamilton type witch. I mean, an absolute psychopath, a sociopath, a dangerous and driven monomaniacal individual. I didn't know how she was going to get there, but that's, or Humbert from Lolita, or,
Mm.
Freddy Krueger, something like, be no variety. This person would be soulless and psychopathic from the beginning. And I really intended that at first. I got to the scene, because since you're talking about the Munchkinlander section, I got to the scene about page 40 or so, when Elphaba is about 1.5 or 2, and I finished writing the scene with a paragraph that says, the nanny and the mother are watching her, and she is crawling around on the floorboards, and she pees
Mm.
on the floor, and she leans down her green-skinned face to smell it and smiles at the smell of her own pee. And I meant that to be revolting. I meant that to be evidence of her twisted nature, as it were. The next day, when I got up and read the previous couple of paragraphs to just kind of gin myself up and get right back in the mood of things and find out where I was and the tone of where I was, I read that passage and I thought, oh my goodness. Instead of hating her, my heart broke.
Mm.
My heart went out to her. Wait for that.
No, I like the clock.
and I thought to myself, you poor thing, nobody is ever going to get you, are they? They're never going to understand you. You are going to be alone your whole life. And on that day, my attitude toward my character changed. And my concept of what I was doing changed when I turned the page over and started the next chapter. It followed along, but I realized I had to, this was a dance I was doing with my main character, and she was leading, and she should lead. And my job was to follow her and see where on the dance floor she took me. My job was not to lead her. I had just had to be the scribe and follow her and see what she did and write it down. I thought two things would happen if I did this. One is that I would write a book that would be dismissed as, oh, somebody's tried to rehabilitate the Wicked Witch of the West, ho hum. And it would not be taken as a serious novel of ideas. And to some extent, I was right. That is what happened. The book, as successful as it's been, as beloved as it is by many people, has never been considered a novel of ideas in the way that I intended it to be. But that's a sacrifice I made. I didn't make it for commercial gain. I never thought the book was going to do what it has done. I made it because my commitment to Elphaba was stronger than my own appetite to be considered a lofty intellectual by the New York Review of Books crowd.
Yeah. Well, and I think, remind me if I'm wrong, definitely with the part, but an aspect that I think gives so much philosophical background is when Elphaba is hiding away in Fiera's homeland in the Vinkus country.
Right.
But there's that
Right.
specific section, is it Kiamako, where
Yeah.
Fiero has
Yeah.
died, and I really love Fiera's wife. I think Surima.
Surima.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's like when we meet who will find out to be Elphaba's child, and
Right.
but all of that, right, is not in the musical, which I'm kind of curious, since I've taught your novel first, and now we're deep into the musical. I showed a documentary that's on YouTube about the musical, and there's a section, a quote, I don't know if you know of this, but it's called like behind the curtain, and it's about Wicked. And there's this beautiful photo of you on opening night with Stephen Schwartz. And there's a quote where you say, when you first saw Wicked performed, I guess it was San Francisco in its tryout, you were concerned. And then you eventually made peace with it. So what did that quote mean? Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about one of our ITBR sponsors, Broadview Press. Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high-quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish mainly in English studies, writing, philosophy, and history. They are always publishing with an eye towards diversity, building a strong list of titles from women, people of color, and authors from other marginalized groups. If you haven't heard my Broadview Press interviews, you need to. Recently, I just had on Dr. Shannon Day, who talked about her book, Beyond the Binary, Thinking About Sex and Gender. And in the summer, I had on Dr. Jason Holt, who gave us all a comprehensive history of what it means to be a philosopher who studies sporting culture. And of course, we went back to ancient Greek literature, mythology, history to look at the roots of athleticism. And last year, I had on Dr. Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, who's actually going to be coming on the podcast soon to give his thoughts on the new Fall of the House of Usher Netflix series. He talked all about pop culture for beginners. So you might ask, well, how can I get my hands on Broadview Press's books? Well, make sure that you go to their website, broadviewpress.org, use the code Ivory Tower for 20% off all of their books, all Broadview Press books. And while you're at it, make sure you follow them on Instagram at Broadview Press. Enjoy your reading, everyone. Are you a fan of LGBTQ plus books, plays, movies, TV shows? Well, then I have the magazine for you. It's called The Gay and Lesbian Review. The GNLR is a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies. Each issue brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme, and it brings together the leading minds on the topic. So I just had on Dr. Richard Schneider Jr., the founder and editor-in-chief of the GNLR. For the GNLR's 30th anniversary, happy birthday, GNLR. Dr. Richard Schneider talked about their special volume called Outer Appearances, More Faces from the Annals of the GNLR, illustrations by Charles Heffling. They cover current LGBTQ artists such as Harvey Fierstein, Melissa Etheridge, Alan Cumming, James Whiteside, Alison Bechdel, and even David Sedaris, and of course, many others like Stephen Sondheim. There's even a supplemental issue that comes with your commemorative volume. And Andrew Halloran, the writer of Dancer from the Dance, he reviews a book called Morris about E.M. Forster's Morris, written by one of our ITBR guests, David Grevin. So we can't wait for you all to experience this beautiful 30th anniversary GNLR issue. Have you heard some of my GNLR interviews, including Dr. Andrew Lear's discussion about male-male love in ancient Greek society and Ignacio Darnad opening and blasting the closet door in the queer male art world? Well, definitely make sure you listen to them after this episode. And the GNLR is offering an exclusive discount because of their sponsorship with us. So head to glreview.org. Make sure you subscribe to their magazine. You'll see there's a section that says subscribe at the top. Enter the promo code ITBR50. That's ITBR50 to receive 50% off. 50% off any print or digital subscription. Enjoy your reading.
Well, I haven't seen that quote. Whatever I said, I'm sure I meant. But when I first heard the read through of the play, which was like a staged reading just around a table, like reading a TV script where the actors are taking the parts. Only in this case, it was a sing through. And it was in some loft in the West 20s, someplace in Manhattan, with Adina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth, and Stephen Schwartz was there, and Winnie Holtzman. I think it was the first time I ever met Winnie. Certainly the first time I met Adina and Kristen. And I didn't know what they were going to have done with the plot. What I did know is that I had given them pretty much carte blanche to do what they wanted with it. Once Stephen Schwartz had convinced me that he understood the reasons that I had written the book, I thought to myself, the plot is not sacrosanct. What's sacrosanct is the intention, is the moral. is the mood. And so I was funny in some places. Stephen Schwartz and Minnie Holzman were funny in others. I was serious in some places. Stephen Schwartz and Minnie Holzman were serious in others. When I first saw the plot and saw that Elphaba was going to pop out of the trapdoor at the end of the play, I thought, oh my gosh, I've sat here for 2 hours and 18 minutes investing in this character, and now they've tricked me. They've pulled the rug out from under me, and I initially thought it was a cop-out, and it was cheapening. And it turned the novel from a tragedy, it turned the story from a tragedy into a drama with a bittersweet ending. And at first I thought that was a mistake. But what I came to realize, and I should say, the very first performance to a paying public, which was the first preview in San Francisco, there were boos when Elphaba popped out of the stage. There were, not everybody in the audience was happy and relieved. I'm sure there were some clappings, but I think a lot of people felt, wait a minute, this is a betrayal of what we know, and have you spending this whole evening tricking us? And that's pretty cheap. And that's sort of how I felt. It wasn't the only thing that I felt, but it was one of the ways that I felt when I heard about what was going to happen. But as I saw it, the first week that it played in San Francisco, I saw it 4 or 5 times. And I did that partly thinking, if this never makes it to Broadway, I want to be able to picture it in my head for the rest of my life. So I went multiple times. And it was wonderful each time. But by the time I got to the end of the week, I thought, well, actually what happens is the dramaturg and the musician, the composer, have decided to get to the place that I wanted to be at the end of the novel by taking a different method and a different road. I think that the goals of most fiction that moves us are fairly consistent. They're fairly constant. One goal you have is that you want people to think what we do matters in life. It's a 19th century novel of ideas in a way, even though it was published in 1995, the end of the 20th century. But it suggests, a little bit like a Tolstoy, to put myself in grand company that I don't deserve, it suggests that what moves we make in life and what our behaviors and actions are really have consequence and are important. So what we do matters. Time is brief, and we should cherish those whom we love. We should cherish them while we have them. Those were 3 things that I wanted the reader to come away with at the end of Wicked, closing the book with a sigh, sad for the death of the witch rather than happy and relieved. But those are the consequences of observing a death. When somebody dies young, it reminds us to live more fully. It reminds us that what we do matters. It reminds us that we should be open and frank and persistent in our love. And that's what a tragedy gives to us. That's the reward of tragedy, is it reminds us to live while we can. Yeah. In a way, the play gets there just you taking a different tone and taking a different route. But you come out of the play with a slight lump in your throat, and you've been brought to the same concluding basket of emotions. So once I came around to thinking about it like that, I began to regret the dramaturgical choices a little bit less than I had them. In fact, quite a bit less than I had the first time.
Yeah, and you're so close to the material. I mean, I can't even imagine what that was like to be at the workshop. And I remember the workshop, Dr. Dillerman died, it followed more where there was a funeral, and
yes, exactly.
And there was more death in the workshop than what we now see. But I see what you mean about the end, because to Glinda thinks Elphaba's dead.
Right.
So there is still that horror. There's still that pathway, like you're saying, you get there, and Alphaba knows she can never return back.
Right.
And I'm kind of curious, like, what do you make of how Alphaba and Glinda in the musical, in a way, almost their different approaches to feminism, or also they're such a leading lady pair that you rarely see. So like
Yeah.
were you surprised that Glinda was as, I'll say it, central to Wicked?
No, I wasn't, because I knew that the um, unless the story of Wicked had been made into a miniseries,
Hmm.
uh, which it still may do at some point, uh, that to take my story, which runs over a 38-year period and has something like 85 speaking parts, to put that on in 2.5 hours means inevitably that most of it has to drop away, and most of the backstories have to drop away. Uh, and a lot of the philosophizing, and certainly a lot of my Rococo descriptions of manners and architecture and morals and whatever, all that stuff has to be boiled down into a song lyric or two, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. I expected that, and I knew that Winnie Holzman and Stephen Schwartz would have to find the strongest relationships that were available in the book and play on those, because that's what theater is about. It's about conflict between individuals. So I pretty much expected that it would be Glinda and Elphaba, and I was not surprised that they made it into a romantic triangle with Fiyero as the pivot point between Glinda and Elphaba. Um, One of the things that is less well observed, but is nonetheless true, is that almost every one of the changes that the script writer, the playwright, Winnie Holzman and Stephen Schwartz made upon the original material, which is my book, were keyed or cued or winked at by me in the book, as if to say, oh, you think it's going to go here? Well, it might have done if I were be more obvious, but it's not going to. So I gave a few hints that Glinda was not unaware of Fiero's charms.
Mm-hmm.
I gave a hint that Elphaba thought that the Scarecrow might be Fiero coming for her at last, at the end of in the Camel Coast section at the end, called "The Murder in His Afterlife." I there was a lot that I threw out as red herrings to cause the reader to hope or to imagine, and then I would pull back that because it was perhaps too obvious for a book, but it wasn't too obvious for a play. And the play, as I say, got to where it was going using different tools and methods.
Yeah, well, and even though you said there is that sadness, I mean, there is kind of a vampiric Alphaba death. I mean,
Yes.
well, and my students really enjoyed analyzing the burning at the stake kind of witch imagery you put there.
Oh, yes,
With
right.
her gown catching fire, and
yeah.
But we have all of your Wicked years. So right after you're done Wicked, you can read Son of a Witch,
yes,
and
right.
make your way through. But something that fascinates me a lot is, really how throughout the novel, you really portray good versus evil. I mean, you've talked about like that is the philosophical
Yeah.
vein. And I was kind of curious. I tried to do this lesson with my students, and we found that we couldn't place any of the central characters on either purely good or purely evil, because, like my students said, how are we basing good and evil ourselves?
Right.
And, is that character, is their intention, like Nessa Rose being the governor of Munchkinland?
Right.
Is she coming from a pious place in her mind? She wouldn't necessarily see her actions as evil, even though to us, they seem, oh, this is authoritarian oppression to the Munchkinlanders.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, I am curious, though, which character do you sympathize with the most, which is tough, but
Are you talking about the play or the book?
in the book.
In the book, well, I think that your analysis of the complexity of each of the characters is adroit and correct.
Hmm.
And I can sympathize and empathize with people while still thinking, you've got a few screw looses, honey. you know, a few screws loose, excuse me. The uh, the fact is that Elphaba is a very attractive character to me, but she is maniacal at times, and she loses her way repeatedly,
Hmm.
morally. She makes a lot of the same mistaken assumptions that cause people to become vigilantes and cause people to go out into the public marketplace and do harm. I don't admire that. I admire her ferocious passion for justice, but I don't necessarily admire her intellectual cool.
Hmm.
She's intellectually hot. She's not intellectually cool. And she therefore is in the grip of emotions that lead her, I think, to make poor choices repeatedly. Uh, if you were to change the question around a little bit, Andrew, and say, what is the moment in your depiction of the life of Elphaba that you most admire of her behavior?
Hmm.
It's the moment in which she is superficially the most cruel. And that's the moment in the last section where the soldiers down the slope from her castle have crucified a man and he's dying. And she goes under cover of darkness and kills him to take him out of his pain. And in some ways, I think that is her finest moment. She's finally used her passion and her power to do something totally selfless. And while she tried to kill Madame Horrible in the City of Emerald section, she couldn't do it. That, she hated herself for it, for her weakness, for not being able to sacrifice a bunch of uppity schoolgirls, from fancy houses. Um, she may have made the right choice, but she wasn't happy with her choice either, and it sort of sent her into another bit of a tailspin.
Yeah.
So I don't admire any of them fully, and I do recognize that everybody has reasons to make wrong decisions, and we all do make wrong decisions, like all the time. All the time we make wrong decisions, even with hearts as big as all outdoors.
Mhm.
We can't know enough always to make the right decisions. It's what we have to live with. It's the
Yeah.
curse.
Yeah. Well, and there's right, the character who can't get away from death is Nessarose in the musical because the house has to fall.
Yes.
And I do, for some reason, Nessarose, I do find one of the most intriguing of the characters you write.
Uh-huh.
Like just because of all of her, maybe it's because, she's disabled and she was converted really to believe in a certain religion by her father to like really fulfill, like trying to peel back the layers of what does she
Right.
really, who is she at her own core
Right.
is difficult. And I'm always intrigued by those characters.
Yeah. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
I can tell you for sure. I have a younger sister who is a evangelical Christian.
Mm.
Uh, and she once said to me, "Did you base Nessarose on me?" Um,
Oh, wow.
and I said, "No, I did not. I did not, Annie." But I could see why she asked the question,
Mm.
because I have a certain skepticism toward people who are assured that they know something that nobody else knows, or are assured that they have the answer to unanswerable questions. I am comforted to think of them being comforted, but I don't want to hand them my car keys.
That's true. That's true. Well, and I think she does have the psychological depth in her musical number, The Wicked Witch of the East.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, when, you know, the ruby slippers, again, different from your novel, right? She's
Yeah.
gifted them from her father in the novel. In the musical, Alphaba concocts them from the grimoire to have her walk, which I
Right.
think works really. It makes a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of sense.
Yeah.
My students said, "Oh yeah, that makes sense to get her, to transform her from being in the wheelchair and now walking, and
Right.
the Tin Man creation from Bach, like all of that, you know, fits together." But again, I think she has a lot of psychological depth. But I want to ask you again. I know all of those with the cast and creative team. This
Yeah.
is Gregory's opinion, but
Yeah.
which musical number do you really, I don't want to say hits the tone for you, but has a psychological depth that you think about a lot?
Well, I, that's an easy one to answer, even though, I mean, most of them have at least two, almost every song has at least two moods in it. Um, but I mean, I love Glinda's opening number at the top of Act
Mhm.
Two. It,
Yes.
I
I
couldn't
am
be happy.
so glad you said thank goodness. That's my favorite.
Yeah. Oh,
That's my
really?
favorite number. I think
Yeah.
it's her largest character. Well, we just ended class saying, who do you think, which Alphaba Glinda stays with you longer after the musical?
Yeah.
And not that Alphaba doesn't stay with me from the musical, but I think
Yeah.
anyone who has a large character arc in a musical just stays with me because of their psychology. And I
Yeah.
think Glinda, it's thank goodness when she actually realizes the decision she's making to stay in power.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
she's not going to get everything she wants, and her life is
Mhm.
not going to be. She was fed that happy basket of biscuits that we all get in childhood, that things are going to be okay, and things are not going to be okay. Um,
My good friend Mandy Bangle is the owner of Mandy Made It, a craft company where she specializes in crochet and pre-cut handmade gifts. So whether your partner is a horror movie fanatic, I'm sure that they have a TV show they love. Maybe there's a book that they love, a music artist, a sports team that they cheer for. Mandy has you covered, from shirts, hats, beanie hats, which I love to wear at the gym, car decals, beer and coffee koozies, keychains, stuffed animals, signs that you want to put all over your apartment. She is ready to create any customized order. So head to Instagram right now, type in at Mandy Made It. That's Mandee, made it. Slide into her DMs, and she is ready to start working on your order. Just send her a few ideas. You could say, "Hey, my boyfriend really loves horror movies." Or, "Hey, my boyfriend really loves the Broadway musical, Wicked." I'm sure she will figure out some concoction for you, and say that you heard her ad on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, because she's going to give you an exclusive ITBR free gift. She's also working on a new line of ITBR merchandise, so I can't wait to share all of that information with you. I can't wait to see what you all get for Valentine's Day for your partner, your family, your friends. Hey, I might even get a true crime item for Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime in Academia. I'm sure my boyfriend and Mary don't listen to this podcast, so they don't know what gifts I'm going to get them. Wink, wink. Make sure you mention at Ivory Tower Boiler Room when your gift arrives from Mandy so I can share it out on our Instagram. I hope you all enjoy your gifts. So, you all know that I am such a fan of musical theater and classic movies. So, I can't wait for you all to listen to one of my good friends' podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, hosted by Christian Garcia. It's a podcast that looks at classic cinema films that we know and love. And he was inspired by Turner Classic Movies and The Great Movie Ride. Remember that amazing ride where the Wicked Witch of the West rose up in a burst of flame in Disney? That was one of my favorite rides. I'm so sad it closed. So, while looking at classic films, Christian is so excited to look at it with a queer lens. And he brings on friends like myself to talk about all of these films. I was on the first episode when we discussed The Sound of Music. I've been on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. He just released an episode about the Philadelphia story. He's done Meet Me in St. Louis, Sweet Charity, Psycho, Mary Poppins, Hello Dolly. He had on Down the Yellow Brick Road hosts and the Garland Gab hosts to talk about The Wizard of Oz. So make sure that you listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify and follow him on TikTok and Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Okay, start watching the classic movies and make sure you listen to Christian's podcasts.
So that's certainly one of them, but I probably would have wobbled between Thank Goodness and No Good Deed, which is probably, when I first saw the play, I thought that was one song that could come out. But as I've lived with the play for 18 years now, it's a highlight for me. I find it more powerful even than Defying Gravity. Defying Gravity is brave and chilling, but No Good Deed is adult. And
Yeah. Well, I agree. Yeah, that's a very, again, I think that shows the rawness of Alphaba, right? Like, thank goodness is Glinda's rawness, and No Good
yeah,
Deed is Alphaba's.
yeah.
Um,
No Good Deed is
yeah.
where, to take the idea from Stephen Schwartz and Marie Holtzman, No Good Deed is where she finally gets to be Margaret Hamilton.
Ah,
That's where she's converted from being a schoolgirl to the person who was as capable of scaring the world as everybody said she already was. She
mm,
actually wasn't until that point, but at that point, she just embraces it and is as close to being a psychopath or a sociopath as she's going to get. She isn't really close there because even at that point, she does back down,
yeah.
uh, but she's really losing it. I had I know our time is moving along.
No, go
When
ahead.
Wicked came out initially, I got a wonderful letter that I believe perhaps I didn't save, which was too bad, by a woman named something like Kay Redfield Jameson or Kay Redfield Jameson.
Oh,
And she's the author of a number of books on human psychology, including one called An Unquiet Mind.
mm,
And it's about uh, being bipolar. And and uh, and she wrote to me and she said, I've just read Wicked, and you have given us the portrait of a person who hits every single one of the characteristics that are identified for somebody who is mentally unstable in this particular kind of diagnostic way.
wow.
Unstable is perhaps a word I shouldn't use. Mentally categorizable in this
Hmm.
particular
Hmm. Hmm.
diagnostic way. I didn't know whether I believed her or not. I'm now 25 years older, and I think maybe she's right. Maybe that's part of what Alphaba is like. I certainly there's a certain thing that Bach says to Alphaba at the very end in the last section. I think the last time that they see each other,
Yeah.
when she's hunting for Dorothy, and Dorothy has passed by Bach and gone on, and Elphaba shows up. And this actually is from a scene in the book too. In the book, when Dorothy leaves the Munchkin land and starts off for the wizard, she spends the first night at the home of a Munchkin farmer named Bach, BOQ, and that's where I got the character of Bach, and that's how he ended up studying agriculture at Chiz University, 25 years earlier or whatever it was, 15 years earlier. So Alphaba in my book comes down the road, and she's showing up, half a day or a day later than the scene that L. Frank Baum wrote, and Bach says she's looking for Dorothy, and Bach says to her, are you taking against her? Are you taking against her? Don't do that. Like, get a grip, lady. But that business of taking against somebody is actually one of the symptoms of certain kinds of mental disorders,
Oh,
where
wow.
you grip onto somebody as someone who's harmed you, and you can no longer see them as a full human being. You can only see them as the perpetrator of the harm that you have suffered. And I've, in the time since I wrote Wicked, I've seen that in a number of people, and I recognize it now as a symptom of a condition that is hard to live with and hard for other people to live with too. So I think Kay Redfield Jameson actually may have been onto something without my knowing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I know I was reading Wicked, I think 4 years after I came out as gay. And I know that I can see there's such like those who feel marginalized or who are struggling, like thinking of coming out. There's definitely like queerness, I know, throughout a lot of your works.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you for providing such a place to really, go through all of the depths of someone who's just trying to find their authenticity. So, thank you for that, Gregory.
Well, I never really know whether one should say I'm proud or I'm humbled, but I suppose I'm a little bit both. I'm humbled that this has meant something to you, and I'm proud that I was able to do something that had that impact for you and for many, many, many other people that I've heard from over the course of the last quarter century. I mean, two things. I think everybody feels marginalized. No one in the world feels that they're in the center of the world unless they're really deeply, deeply, deeply ill, like a few people we could name, but we won't.
Yeah, you're
If
talking
you
about
feel-
narcissistic personality.
I am.
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
And if you feel that you are that centralized in the world, such that the lives of everybody else are really just some kind of moving wallpaper to ornament the space in which you're spending your time, that's a grave sickness. Most of us feel like we're moving wallpaper, on the edges of somebody else's life. And when we're young, it cuts us to feel that way. And as we get older, you kind of think, well, this ain't so bad. I can slide along here and watch what I want to watch and be who I want to be. And I don't have to measure up to anybody's portrait of me. That's not my job, and
Exactly.
and so having felt marginalized myself as a kid for many reasons, and I've been able to dip my bucket in that well of despond, if you will, many, many times, and find what I come up with is merely the kind of moist essence of being human. We all feel that way. We all feel that way.
Wow. Wow. Well, okay. So I'm going to move into a section that I'm calling Student Corner. And these are not that it's going to be rapid fire, like, okay, hit me with a response, but they're, more lighthearted, and we've gotten to the deep themes. I do want to let you know, though, when I think I was the secretary of our book club in high school, I chose Mirror, Mirror, which I could talk a lot about, but everyone I know who loves Wicked, I say you have to read Mirror, Mirror, because what you do with Renaissance, the Renaissance and the bourgeois is mind-blowing. And Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister. I saw that ABC TV film, which I loved, and then read the novel. But okay, that kind of leads into one of my students' questions. They really want to know, Aaron, about, and these were a few of my students. They really want to know about the other media forms. So you mentioned about the rights of Wicked.
Right.
Is it still owned by ABC for a TV series?
Yes, it is. It's licensed by ABC. It's owned by ABC. At the time that I was trying to peddle it, as it were, or it was being peddled. I wasn't really trying; it was peddling itself. I had been in the middle of adopting my 3 children who came to me as infants, and so the need to be able to pay for their upbringing as a freelance artist was intense. And when the rights came back from Universal and were going to be sold instead for the stage for a fraction, a penny on what Universal would have bought them for as a film, I was able to split the rights into a musical version and a non-musical version. The non-musical version I sold to ABC for enough money to help me remodel my house. Later on, when Wicked the musical was such a big success, I went back to ABC and tried to buy the rights back because
Oh,
I
wow.
I could afford them, and they didn't want to sell them back to me. So they
Huh.
own them, and they have been slowly working for 15 years to line up a project that may be a mini series
I hope
based
so.
on.
Please, please. I want it. My students, this was Gabriella too, like really want a TV show. And even as a class, we kind of already divided each part can be a season of Wicked. And then they could do that for every one of the Wicked years.
It's true. It's true. And there's some thought about that, but it would have to be a success like on the level of Game of Thrones in order to merit that kind of
Yeah.
investment.
But
And
there's
I
so
don't
many
know.
streaming services now, I hope, because
Yeah.
like,
It's not impossible.
I
I'm not
know.
holding my breath though. I'm just getting on with my job, my day
No,
job.
it's true. It's true. Okay. Well, I'm also curious. Do you remember any? Well, because I know the creative team, probably you had a lot of conversations. I know with Steven Schwartz
Yeah.
and maybe even Mark Platt, the producer, and
Mhm.
Winnie Holtzman writing the book for the
Yeah.
musical. But do you remember any cast member who wrote to you about your novel?
Not no no. I haven't had any writing. I haven't had any letter from any cast member. I have had conversations with cast members though, and one time early on, Carol Shelley, who played Madame
Oh,
Marable,
yeah.
uh, and I were sitting next to each other at a dinner. It was a birthday party for Joel Grey, I think,
Oh,
and she leaned to me and she said, "I have a secret backstory for Madame Marable, and I know why she is the way she is."
mm.
And I said, "Oh, do you? What is it? Will you tell me?" She
Yeah.
said, "No."
Oh my
but
goodness.
but I think I could guess what it is. I think I could guess what it is. But but it's clear that that's how actors work. They actually go deep into the character. They think I've got to find the reason for my character being this motivated to behave like this. What is it that the author is not telling us, but that nonetheless I need to know so I can motor this character across the stage.
Yes, yes. And right, there's so many different acting methods. And like I
Yeah.
could see maybe someone wants to approach it more from like Stanislavski, which is um, just method, like really do method and maybe, not want to do a deep dive of the material for the musical if it's going to complicate.
Right.
But I mean, I like to approach by taking anything around and just analyzing. I mean, I'm sure though you must have talked to Kristen Chenoweth and Adina Menzel at some point, right?
Oh, I talked to them a lot, but I didn't talk to them about their interpretation of the material because
Mm.
they're professional artists. They knew how to do their job. They didn't need my input. And the only funny story I have about Adina Menzel, not the only funny story, but the one that's pertinent to this is that in the famous penultimate night that she played the role on Broadway, you may remember she fell through the trap door.
Oh,
Um,
yes, yes. She wasn't
and
able to do her final
she wasn't able to do her
closing.
final, and I didn't know about her fall the night before because I hadn't got the times the next morning. And so I was in New York to see her final
Oh,
performance,
wow.
and I opened up the playbill, and it said tonight the part of Alphaba will be played by Shoshana Bean. And I was like, what? And I've come down to New York to see Adina, and Shoshana did a great job,
Oh, yeah.
terrific
She's
job.
amazing. Well, I think
She
all of those well, anyone who played Alpha, but also Stephanie J. Block. I mean,
They were all
love them
great.
all.
This particular night, though, everybody was in the room was there because they wanted to see Adina's last night.
Wow.
And when Shoshana Bean came out instead of Adina, there was like, I mean, everybody had seen the slip, but she was not the flavor of the month. They were annoyed, and Shoshana used that kind of resistance to her to power her own performance that night. And by the time she got to Defying Gravity and she lifted up at the bottom of Act One, and she wasn't Idina Menzel, but she was saying basically "F you" to the
Mm-hmm.
to the audience. Like, I don't care. The audience was just on its feet. They were just so with her. She had actually won them over the way the character of Elphaba moves through Act One. But at the end of that last night, Idina Menzel did come out on stage, as you may have read in papers. And
I think in a red tracksuit, if I remember.
She was in a red tracksuit, and she had her neck in a collar, and she played the last 90 seconds or 2 minutes of the play. And then afterwards, there was an after party, and I went, and she was sitting in a booth like this, high on all kinds of meds. And she saw me, and she went. And I went over and sat down next to her, and I said, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to make you hurt anymore. And she said, you did this to me. And I said, what? She said, it's all your fault. And I said, what are you talking about, Idina? And she said, you always thought the witch should die.
Oh, wow.
Which was true. So she did
know. That's funny though.
She did know my reaction to the first readings of the play.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah. I am curious you probably know as much as we do about the upcoming movie musical, but are you tied to the project at all?
I am not. No, I just made a decision very, very, very early on that I did not want to be beholden to it. I wanted to be a godfather or a grandfather, not a father. Those are decisions I had it within my legal rights to make, and I made them in the interest of my own mental health and the interest of being able to pay attention to the needs of my children, which were more important to me and remain more important to me. So I'm starting to get a few little bits and pieces of gossip, which I am not at liberty to share. But generally speaking, I know things only about 20 minutes before the rest of the world, if I ever do even. So I didn't know about Ariana Grande being cast as Glinda or Cynthia Erivo being cast as Elphaba until the rest of the world knew about it.
Yeah.
I was actually a little surprised. I thought Ariana Grande might be Elphaba. It was an interesting conversion, but I'm thrilled about it. And
they're powerhouses. I'm excited. I'm curious, but like I said, the movie musical can exist, but we need a TV series too.
Yeah. I agree. There's a lot of Wicked left to go around.
Exactly. Well, I think on that note, once this premieres, actually the week that this is premiering, I'll be with my students to see Wicked. So I can't wait to see the first Black Linda, Brittany. Johnson.
Right. Brittany Johnson.
Yeah. And okay, so I have the Wicked tie-in, but I want to, promote, please get your hands on The Brides of Maricourt. Right. This is, I don't want to say a spin-off series, but it's
that's as good a way to say it. Anything else?
Yeah. Another Day is your new trilogy series.
A new trilogy, and it concerns Rain, the granddaughter of Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West.
Hi, this is Andrew at the Soapbox NY, a bath and body boutique in Port Jefferson Village on Long Island. And I'm going to announce a really fun cross promotion that I'm doing with Janine, the co-owner of the Soapbox. So I'm holding here Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire, who I had the pleasure of interviewing on the podcast. Listen back to that episode. I'm hosting an ITBR book club. We're chatting all about Wicked. So join me on April 7th at 4 p.m. It's virtual, and you can be in your pajamas and be nice and cozy. And it's $4 to join. Go to @Ivory Boiler Room and click the link in our bio to RSVP. So with Janine, I said, Janine, can you find a Team Glinda and a Team Elphaba Bath and Body product? She found them. So I'm definitely Team Elphaba. She's Team Glinda, unfortunately, or fortunately, because we want you all in the comments to say which team you're on. So watch and see which product you're really loving. So here she is.
Hi there, I'm definitely Team Glinda, and the pink product I chose to show you is by Farmhouse Fresh, and it is their Watermelon Aid Silky Gelée Serum. It is a wrinkled out gelée serum that consists of watermelon and CBD. It's vegan, it is animal cruelty free, and it's amazing. It's hyaluronic and it helps to soften out any little fine lines that you might have around your face. Put it on right before your moisturizer, and it's amazing. And I think it's a lot better than my rival's product.
I don't know. Team Alphaba's product is by Finchberry. It is, of course, called Emerald with a beautiful citrus and violet scent. I have to show you the bar. Look at all of these shades of emerald. I think the Emerald City citizens would definitely use this in their shower. And the wizard, oh, well, he would be putting this gold everywhere. So I love Finchberry. They're a vegan-friendly and paraben-free company. So are you Team Alphaba with Finchberry, or are you Team Glinda with Farmhouse Fresh's Watermelonade? Did you hear that? I just heard a cyclone. And look what we have. Looks like we found the Wicked Witch of the East ruby red slippers. You can also get these beautiful Snoozies slippers at the Soapbox NY before Dorothy steals them, because she's a pesky little girl. Okay, let us know which team you're on.
It was so wonderful to re-release this Wicked episode with Gregory Maguire. Again, so much thanks to Gregory Maguire for returning to his Wicked universe, his Wicked worldscape. And again, if you haven't read his new series, The Brides of Maricor, he came on the show about a year ago to talk about the Oracle of Maricor, and Mary to Pippi actually joined me for that one. So I'm now looking at his full Wicked series is Wicked, Son of a Witch, A Lion Among Men, Out of Oz, and then he has his Brides of Maricor series. So as you're listening to this, I'm probably now at the Gershwin Theater for the 2 p.m. performance on March 9th with a group of 14 people, and we're sitting in the front mezzanine enjoying Wicked. So if anyone else wants to join me for a Broadway outing, let me know. I'm planning on going to see either The Great Gatsby or The Wiz, and I can't wait to hear when Sunset Boulevard is coming, because I'm definitely going to Sunset Boulevard. And you know, Janine, the co-owner of the Soapbox, and Christian Garcia, they just had a Sunset Boulevard episode on That Old Gay Classic Cinema. We're all going to be attending, so please join the party. And again, April 7th, a virtual book club discussion of Gregory Maguire's Wicked is happening. Go to ivorytowerboilerroom.com to sign up. It's only $4 to join the book club. Remember that I will help you with social media consultation services. If you are a grad student, I can help you with thesis editing. I can help you with dissertation editing. I can help with college admission essays. So book me, email me, ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com. My Instagram is at Andrew David Rimby. And I love that I now have 3 consulting clients in the Long Island area. They include Crank Cycle, a spin studio in Setauket, the Soapbox NY, a Bath and Body boutique in Port Jefferson Village, and the Port Jeff Saw Cave, also in Port Jefferson Village. I think you can tell I have an affinity to the Port Jeff Village area. Okay, thank you so much all for listening, and see you all next time in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.